After a more than 5-month hiatus, Parliament resumes tomorrow. On Tuesday, the government is set to lay out its priorities via a speech from the throne delivered by His Majesty King Charles III. Two major commitments we're tracking: Prime Minister Mark Carney's promise to end internal trade barriers and to pass a middle-class tax cut. He's pledged to take action on both by Canada Day. Carney's first few weeks, meanwhile, have been mired in some communication misfires. First, over his government's commitment to oil pipelines, and then over whether or not his government will produce a budget this year. We've got a lot, I should say, to unpack, and our Sunday strategy session is here to do just that. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. Kory Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst and former Communications Director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Thanks for making the time. Scott, I'll start with you. Before we look ahead to the throne speech, wanted to get your assessment of how things have gone for the government so far. What stands out to you?
A couple of growing pains. I mean, you mentioned those two sort of cabinet out-gaffes, if you will. Lack of clarity with respect to the government's position on pipelines and energy infrastructure. I think more seriously, a strange kind of miscue from the finance minister about will there be a budget, when will there be a budget? And look, I'm reminded when I try to sort of understand this of that moment during the campaign. There was a Carney rally and someone yelled out, lead us, Big Daddy. Remember that? And everybody got a laugh. The Prime Minister, you got to. Well, I think the government has a bit of a big case of Big Daddies right now. Like you get the feeling that ministers haven't settled into their spot. They don't know that they feel 100% comfortable with what the brief is, and everyone is looking and listening for the Prime Minister. So if the Quebec lieutenant says he doesn't like pipelines, it's like, yeah, who cares? What does the Prime Minister have to say? What's his word on it? The Prime Minister's to go and clean that up. Finance Minister says there won't be a budget this year. Prime Minister stands up to the microphone in Rome and says, actually, we're going to have a budget in the fall. So, that kind of lack of clarity, to my mind, in some respects, it reflects this kind of one-man government. Everyone's looking to Carney. And eventually, Carney's going to have to turn to his cabinet ministers and say, I am expecting you to carry some of this burden, to be clear, to be on point, and it can't just be government by Mark Carney, communication by Mark Carney. The rest of the cabinet is going to have to pull this cart too. So I think that's what we're seeing right now, and that, I think, can be remedied pretty quickly.
Speaking of Big Daddies, Kory, do you agree with do you agree with Scott's assessment? I would say I understand what he's saying, but I think Mark Carney, I think the Prime Minister has certainly positioned himself as like that voice of authority, like in all of his remarks that led up to these past few weeks.
Normally I agree with you a lot, Scott, but on this one I got to say I'm on the other side of the earth. Like I think there's a lack of leadership here. Like Carney is being clear on the pipeline question, for example. What you saw is, I think, the consequence of a really bad cabinet pick, and one that should have been so completely obvious to anyone who's watched Stephen Guilbeault over the last number of years that he's been in federal politics. Like, look, he's an environmental radical whose positions on these issues have been diametrically opposed to the positions that Mark Carney took during the campaign. And it's not a surprise that somebody who's willing to go to jail on those beliefs is certainly willing to break cabinet protocol on communications around those beliefs. He's a radical. He doesn't belong in this government, in my view, or at least not in a cabinet position or anywhere near the controls. Okay, so that's not a surprise. But in terms of the questions around the budget, once again, this is yet another Liberal finance minister with no comms abilities whatsoever. Like, I know that Champagne likes to talk, but he's not a good communicator, and I don't think he'll ever be confused for being one. I think he botched the comms on what was going to happen with the fall economic statement, or is it a budget? Whether it's because he thought he didn't need to check with the PMO and freelanced it, or whether he just botched the comms outright. I don't know. I guess we'll see. But in both these cases, I think these are leftovers from the Trudeau era that should have been left over when it came to making this cabinet.
for a second week in a row, Kathleen, Kory declares his love for Stephen Guilbeault on this program. I mean, where the finance minister is concerned, I have to say, I did an interview with him that week. He was out talking quite extensively. He had very specific points that he made over and over again. It didn't sound to me like he was necessarily, it sounded like that was coming from somewhere.
Yeah, it didn't sound like he was
so
freelancing.
Interesting again, like I'm not disagreeing or defending but what Kory or Scott is saying, but interesting again that they find themselves where he is voraciously defending a position, and then 3 days later that position changes, ultimately when the Prime Minister decides to say something different.
Yeah, I'm going to come in between both Kory and Scott, kind of a Goldilocks viewpoint on this, because I'm not sure if the sputtering start and these kind of misstatements by different cabinet ministers is a result of a lack of staffing, the very quick transition that we're seeing. Like, objectively, this has been fast, right? 2 weeks, the government's back next Monday. It's really been very, very quick. So I give them some leeway on that. But I actually think that the problem is that Carney is the government. And no matter how much he keeps on saying that he wants cabinet government, he wants his cabinet ministers to lead, this will be a government led by my cabinet ministers, the government is best when he is speaking and he is speaking alone. And he's done that correction a few times, right? And so when you saw his mandate letters that he put out to his cabinet ministers. Letter, exactly. Singular, the singular letter is, he really provided a framework, and that provided such a differentiation from all the platitudes that Prime Minister Trudeau used to jam into 10-page letters. We have a 1-page letter, very clear, very concise. Sure, it's missing some key words like healthcare and crime and other things that probably Canadians would like to see in it, but it provides a framework, and he is demanding his cabinet ministers to bring the ideas, to bring the metrics, to bring the measurement tools that they'll be judged by. But the problem is that he's the one, singularly, always coming back and correcting the record and delivering the forceful message alone, and he can't manage this whole government by himself. He's going to have to devolve some of that responsibility to his cabinet.
It's interesting because as you're talking, I was thinking that is what was so successful for the Liberals during the campaign. He was able to differentiate from the previous Liberal government and from his competitors on his own branding, right? But that's a difficult thing to then put into action in government. It's like two very different things. Kory wants to jump in. Yeah, go ahead.
Couldn't you do that easily by having like Tim Hodgson go out and do some communicating? Like if your message is that half the cabinet is new, then why don't you put out some new cabinet ministers and have them communicate? Why don't you draw a circle around some of the people who are there because of you and the beliefs that you have in common with around whether it's resource development.
Scott, I'll get you. I promise. Okay, go for it, Scott. He wants to jump in.
Well, I was just going to say, we'll probably see some of that out of necessity, if nothing else, this week when everybody's back in the House of Commons. So I think we will see some of those. But, Kory, you and I have both been communications directors to a prime minister, and you also need to be careful when you see this sort of mistakes happening with Guilbeault, with Gregor Robertson, with Champagne. I mean, you don't want to compound it by taking a rookie and putting him out there and feeling like, well, you as a newbie have to clean it all up. So I'd be a little bit prudent. They get a restart naturally with the king coming to town. So I think that's the time to reorganize.
Who's a comms genius? I'm sure we'll all agree. Nothing could possibly go wrong there.
Okay, speaking of which, I have a few minutes left, and I do want to look ahead to that speech from the throne, but also like the 3 weeks that will follow in the House. Kory, what are your expectations there?
Oh boy, to build on what Scott just said, I expect we're going to see a lot more fumbling around as the government tries to find its feet. And I think we've seen some of those challenges. I think we're going to see more of them because I don't think it's clear what's going on the staff side yet, which is important. It's behind the scenes, but I think it's really important in how all these things function. And I think we're seeing cabinet ministers who are not really sure what they should be saying or doing, and whether or not they're still stuck on the talking points of the Trudeau government, or what the ailment is. I guess we've debated that already, but I think we're going to see more of that. And I think I'll be watching the opposition too. I'll be very curious to see which direction Poilievre takes. Whether you see some of the more open to working with the Liberals on certain things, sort of sounds coming out of them, which we've seen some of, or whether we'll see some more, everything is fine and, falling back into the more combative campaign style that we've grown accustomed to from them. I'll be interested to see how they play it.
I have an even more basic question. Will we see Mr. Poilievre? Because
Yeah,
right,
because
Kathleen?
right now, you know, is he going to be sitting up in the galleries with others? You know, will he be crammed in with all the guests for the King's speech? I mean, listen, for Monday for the speech from the throne, listen, the Parliament's coming back after being away for over 4 months, right? And during that time, we've seen a leadership race, we've seen a very exciting election, and now it's time for the grind of government, right? Under new management, Carney's there. What's his thesis? That's what I'm looking for. You know, normally speeches from the throne are really just a communication exercise, or, you know, but what will it look like? You know, and even the stagecraft of it all, it is, for me, it requires a lot of mental gymnastics to invite the King to be here to both assert our sovereignty, you know, but have the King actually do the speech, when at the same time Carney has said just this past week that he actually wants further integration with the U.S. in terms of the Golden Dome and all the military and defense and security alliance that comes with that. Like, it's going to be weird, but I mean, everyone's going to be watching Tuesday, excuse me, when the speech from the throne is, and even who's elected for Speaker on Monday, which will be interesting too, because it will tip the scales of how strong, you know, potentially the the strong minority is.
A strong minority, not a majority. Yeah.
Exactly.
Last word to you, Scott. I got 30 seconds. What are you watching for next week?
I'm watching for a couple of things. One, the discipline that we always see around Carney, to the discussion we were just having, will we see it extended to the whole of the cabinet when they're all up on their feet and getting grilled and going to be questioned on a daily basis? Secondly, I think it's going to be interesting to see how specific, how focused his throne speech is. I think you've got a quick session of Parliament. It's an opportunity to say, these are our priorities. There's lots of things to do, but these are the 3, 4, 5 things I want to move on quickly, and establish as our clear starting point. And I think there's a big opportunity for them to reorient. If there's been a couple of early minor stumbles, they can completely correct that with this session.
All right, I'll leave it on that note.